So how does one guy on a tiny island nation just a stone's throw from Florida become this global figure that drives the world's biggest superpower absolutely crazy for 50 years? I mean, seriously, how did a man from this little Caribbean island become a global icon and a thorn in the side of 10, count 'em, 10 US presidents? Well, let's dive in.
Right from the get-go, there have been two totally different stories about Fidel Castro. It really depends on who you ask. To one half of the world, he was a total hero, a liberator who kicked out American influence and brought things like literacy and healthcare to his people. But to the other half, he was a brutal dictator who threw anyone who disagreed with him in jail and crushed all opposition.
And if you really want to get a sense of the kind of pressure this guy was under, get this. The CIA reportedly tried to take him out over 600 times. I mean, think about that for a second. We're talking poisoned cigars, exploding seashells, even a wetsuit dusted with some kind of deadly fungus. You literally can't make this stuff up. It's straight out of a spy movie. But for Castro, that constant threat was real. It absolutely shaped him. It fed his paranoia, and he used it to justify his iron grip on Cuba.
But where did that all come from? You know, that stubborn defiance, that refusal to back down from a superpower. To really understand the man who took on the world, we've got to go all the way back to the beginning, when he was just a kid.
Now, you might think Castro's whole revolutionary thing came from a life of poverty, but that's not it at all. He actually grew up pretty wealthy. His dad was a big-shot sugarcane farmer, but he was a rebel from day one. He was a terrible student, and the story goes that when his dad threatened to cut off his school funding, Fidel threatened to burn the family house to the ground. See? This wasn't just some kid acting out. It was an early look at a guy who just refused to play by anyone else's rules.
Everything changed for him at the University of Havana. He was this, pressure cooker of politics, and Castro, with his big personality and gift for speeches, jumped right into the middle of it. All that rebellious energy he had finally found a focus. What he saw as American companies basically running his country. He'd found his cause. He even took a shot at student politics, running for president with the slogan, honesty, decency, and justice. And the irony here, he got absolutely wiped out. It was a total failure. That was his first taste of democracy, and, well, it was a lesson that clearly stuck with him.
Yeah, so that loss in a student election just made him more convinced that the whole system was rigged. And as things in Cuba got more and more chaotic, Castro's path took a sharp turn. If he couldn't get change with votes, he figured he'd have to get it with bullets.
The real point of no return hit in 1952. A U.S.-backed General Fulgencio Batista just took over the country in a military coup. He canceled the elections that Castro was actually planning to run in. For Fidel, that was it. Democracy in Cuba was dead. His answer was a crazy and totally disastrous attack on a military barracks. He got caught, thrown in jail, but that's where the revolution really started to take shape. After he got out, he was exiled to Mexico, and that's where he met another passionate revolutionary, a young doctor from Argentina you might have heard of, Che Guevara.
So now, with Che Guevara by his side, Castro kicks off what seems like a totally impossible war from the mountains of Cuba. It was basically a war fought with guerrilla tactics, just a small band of rebels up against a modern army.
Just look at these numbers. It's insane. A handful of guys against a 30,000-strong professional army that was getting weapons and money from the U.S. It should have been a complete suicide mission, but Castro's tactics were brilliant, and he had a secret weapon, the support of everyday Cuban people, who were just sick and tired of Batista's corrupt government.
And then, what seemed impossible happened. On New Year's Day, 1959, the dictator Batista just up and fled the country. Castro's bearded rebels came down from the mountains, and they weren't outlaws anymore. They were heroes. The revolution had won. But, as they were about to find out, winning the war was actually the easy part.
For the next 50 years, Castro would rule Cuba with an absolute iron fist. His time in power was defined by this really strange and often brutal contradiction. He brought incredible social progress, but it came at the cost of personal freedom.
On the one hand, just imagine this. In just a few years, a country pretty much wipes out illiteracy. It makes top-notch healthcare a basic right for everyone, totally free. For millions of Cubans who had only ever known poverty, Castro's revolution felt like a miracle.
But there was a very dark side to this dream. The price for all that progress was total obedience. If you dared to speak out against Castro, you could end up in a prison cell or worse. The very revolution that had promised freedom ended up building a cage.
And of course, Castro's defiance of the United States kicked off a chain reaction that almost ended the world.
When he seized American-owned businesses, Washington went ballistic and slapped a massive economic embargo on Cuba. Then, when he teamed up with the Soviet Union, the Cold War suddenly had a new terrifying hotspot right on America's doorstep. This led to the disastrous Bay of Pigs invasion and, a year later, the Cuban Missile Crisis.
You see, Castro's Cuba had basically put all its eggs in one basket. For decades, the Soviet Union was its economic lifeline. But when the Soviet Union fell apart in 1991, that lifeline was cut. Cuba's economy was completely wrecked. They called it the special period, but really it was a time of incredible poverty and suffering that pushed the revolution to its absolute limit.
And that brings us to the final chapter of this wild story. After a whole lifetime of fighting and defiance, how is history going to remember Fidel Castro?
You know, in the end, Castro outlasted everyone. 10 different American presidents tried and failed to get rid of him. And it wasn't a CIA plot or some big invasion that finally ended his rule. It was just old age. He finally stepped down in 2008, handing power over to his brother Raul, and he died in 2016.
Look, love him or hate him, and believe me, there are millions of people who do both with incredible passion. You just can't deny his impact. He took this small, seemingly insignificant island, and for 50 years made it the center of the world's attention.
So, we're back to where we started. Who was Fidel Castro? Was he the hero who gave his people education and dignity, or was he the dictator who stole their freedom? You know, maybe the real answer is that he was both. And that complicated, messy contradiction is the real legacy of the man who dared to take on the world.